take action, and that's your act of heroism. You don't have to be there in the moment. It's okay if you freeze. That's science. After it's over, now you can be a hero.
I'm Stephen Pond.
And I'm Ben Jeppsen.
Welcome to The Next Ideal,
a Stormlight self-help podcast.
Welcome back to The Next Ideal. We are jumping into part 2 now in The Way of Kings. We finally get to meet Dalinar. Our first introduction to Dalinar, though, is through his son, Adolin. Frankly, one of my favorite characters in the entire Stormlight Archive. Adolin is the best boy. Adolin and Dalinar and the king, as well as a whole bunch of soldiers, are going out onto the Shattered Plains for a chasm fiend hunt. We haven't seen chasm fiends at this point, but we will. They're going out to hunt a chasm fiend, which are huge crab-like monsters that can take out a person even in Shardplate. We learn about Shardplate.
The Alethi believe that the Parshendi see the chasm fiends as gods. They're the gods, yes, of the Parshendi.
So they are on their way out to the plateau where this hunt is supposed to take place. And Adolin is thinking about his dad, Dalinar, who is the high prince of the Kholin princedom. Alethkar is made up of 10 different princedoms, each having their own high prince. And then Elhokar is the king over the entire nation. Elhokar is a Kholin. He's the son of Gavilar, who was assassinated in the prologue. And Dalinar, who we saw briefly in that prologue, is the Kholin High Prince. And Dalinar has apparently been having some strange behavior. He's had some kind of epileptic fits during high storms. He's been saying things that no one can understand, mumbling.
It's almost like he's speaking in tongues, right? He's babbling. He's babbling.
That has been affecting the Alethi army's view of Dalinar. He used to be this great general, and now people are starting to think of him as more of a lapdog to Elhokar the king, bowing to the whims of this individual who seems to be generally thought of as a weak king.
Yeah, Dalinar definitely sounds like he's past his prime. Adolin's embarrassed of him. And he has this interesting inner conflict, right? Adolin clearly admires his father. He loves him. He has looked up to him. He talks about his past as something that he wanted to emulate. His father was someone he was proud of, but not so much anymore. And he's very defensive about his father's honor.
And we see Dalinar and Elhokar have a race, basically, which I think narratively is just to exhibit the power of Shardplate. But they both jump off their horses, climb up this spire of rock, and are able to see across the Shattered Plains. And Dalinar and Elhokar have a conversation, leading with Dalinar mentioning Gavilar. And that sort of sets Elhokar off, and he gets angry and turns into himself. We see that Elhokar's been paranoid recently about assassins. He claims he saw someone in the shadows who was watching him. Dalinar has been investigating that and has found no evidence that there was someone who was trying to assassinate Elhokar, but Elhokar is certain that there was. And eventually, Wit shows up, the King's Wit.
One of the best characters.
Brandon has said that the inspiration for this character was Shakespearean fools. I was just in a production of King Lear this past Halloween, and so I'm very familiar with the fool in King Lear, Touchstone, and like the fool in As You Like It, and Twelfth Night, and all of these Shakespearean fools, and I can totally see that in Wit. It's so great.
And yet there's nothing foolish about Wit, right? Like, he is witty. He is brilliant.
Well, that's one of the hallmarks of Shakespearean fools is they're called a fool, but they know more than anyone else on stage.
That sounds like Wit. I want to talk a little bit about Dalinar's madness, because Dalinar, he's talking about this message that he has received to unite them. And we have very little context for this right now, but he feels like he's been told to unite the High Princes. But whatever he's going through, people around him are very unsettled by it, and they think he's losing his mind. It reminds me of, I just finished teaching a class called The Psychology of Religion. We look at the psychological study of religion and religious experience, prayer, faith, church attendance, how it's related to mental health and all that stuff. But one of the things that makes it a hard field to study is when somebody describes having a spiritual experience. they feel the Holy Spirit or they feel the presence of God. All they can do is describe that experience in whatever language they use, but it's our understanding of it is limited by their description. It reminds me of the game Telestrations. Have you ever played Telestrations?
Uh-huh.
I actually brought it to my class and we played a round of Telestrations.
Perfect.
To illustrate this point that like you have an idea, but then you draw that word. So you have a word and you draw it like Pictionary and you pass that picture to someone else who then tries to guess what you drew on another page.
They
phrase
write the word
you
drew. Yeah.
And so then they pass that word to the next person who draws what they wrote. And we see how the picture and the idea morphs over time in a game of telephone, essentially. And the idea, though, is that you have this word that you're trying to communicate, but you can't communicate it directly. The reason why this applies is the difference between hearing the voice of God and hearing a hallucination is impossible to prove. When someone says they heard the voice of God or they felt God's spirit or they felt this thing, they describe it in words, and then the scientist is limited to their words in terms of understanding it. It may be that somebody really is having visions from God or hearing the voice of God, and a psychologist calls them schizophrenic because they're hearing voices. And I didn't hear those voices. Therefore, they were a hallucination. It's this interesting limitation of our ability to research the inner experience of a person. Like we have our experiences, but they are our own. And the only way that we can share those experiences with others is through description. And they then interpret our description however they're going to interpret it. And so Dalinar's having something going on. Is it madness or not? Remains to be seen.
That reminds me of a concept that I have sort of struggled with for a while, of just the subjectivity of truth. Because we are all limited by our own perspective. And what can be true for me might not necessarily be true for you. And when I express my truth because of your perspective, that can be either completely opposite of what you believe would be true, or you think is true, but isn't exactly the way that I meant it. We can have different truth with the same words, depending on what just our individual perspective is. And that's what we're seeing here with Dalinar. Dalinar has this truth that he has been given a divine mandate to unite the High Princes of Alethkar. And everyone else, the truth that they are seeing is that he's going crazy. And that subjectivity of truth, it can be really difficult to reconcile.
Is it subjectivity of truth or subjectivity of experience? If they all think that he's going mad, that is true to them, but I think that they could be wrong. The fact that it's their experience, I don't know if that is truth or it is their true experience. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. I would argue experience, because it is an individual thing, is individual truth. You could say people who are seeing Dalinar behave in this way, very different from the general that they have seen in previous years. He's not being a warlord anymore. He's not driven to fulfill the Vengeance Pact. He's being a lapdog for the king. In that way, the people who are seeing the behavior, seeing the external representation of what Dalinar is going through, would, I would say, be correct in labeling that as madness, because he's behaving differently, culturally differently. We talked about this in previous episode.
Yes. Yeah.
A diagnosis is simply a diagnosis of symptoms, not a pointing of a specific problem, right?
And it becomes disordered when it's different from what everybody says is normal.
Exactly. So by that definition, Dalinar absolutely is going mad because he's behaving differently than the cultural norm and the cultural expectation. The reason why Dalinar is behaving differently is a different truth.
Okay.
But both can exist at the same time.
For me, I think it's the subjectivity of perception.
Yes.
And so it's the subjectivity of perception and understanding. But I do think that at some point there is truth of whether it really is God speaking to him or not. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to get real philosophical about whether objectivity, objective truth exists. Are there any elements of objective truth is an interesting question to ask. I do think that the subjectivity of experience, and to them, yes, he is truly behaving madly. Mm-hmm. He is behaving in a way that would be considered mad. But if they understood the source of his madness, it might change their perspective.
Absolutely. I've been reading Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with my kids before bed. And we've been going through, we just got to the stone table. And I'm interested to see how my children react to what happens at the stone table, because we haven't gotten there yet. But in the beginning of the book, when Lucy first discovers the wardrobe and finds Narnia and goes and has her experience with Mr. Tumnus, and then comes back through the wardrobe with no time having passed in our world, but hours spent in Narnia.
Yes.
She comes back and says, hey, I'm back. I know you guys have been missing me. I've been gone for hours, but here I am. Everything's fine. I'm safe. I'm okay. And the rest of her siblings believe that she's lying. And then eventually Edmund gets trapped in the wardrobe with her. They're playing hide and seek. He follows Lucy into the wardrobe, and they both explore Narnia. Edmund meets the White Witch.
Mm-hmm.
Lucy has another delightful tea with Mr. Tumnus. Then they both come back out, and Lucy says, hey, Edmund was here. Edmund experienced this thing with me that you guys weren't believing me. I have another witness to this experience, another person that can support this truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Edmund says, oh, we were just playing. I deeply love Edmund as a character, mostly because of the growth that he makes in this first book. But that is a point that I will make at a different time.
Okay.
The thing related to this subjectivity of truth and perception here, is Susan and Peter then go to the professor, the guy who owns the house that they're living in, because they had to leave London because of the war.
Right.
So they go to this professor and say, hey, what do we do here? Our younger sister is very obviously lying about this experience she had. Our younger brother also is saying, yeah, she's lying. We were just playing. But she's very insistent that this is true, that she went into a wardrobe and went to a different country. That couldn't possibly have happened. And the professor, rather than saying, well, yeah, let's figure out what's wrong with your sister, he says, okay, what if it is true? What would that change? How would we approach it if this was a real thing that was going on? Even though Lucy is having this mystical experience of going to Narnia and her siblings not believing her, she holds to that truth, and that truth of hers is fully accepted by the professor. I had a similar experience with my kids. This is a very roundabout way to get to the point that I want to make. We were making breakfast for my kids. My boys have certain bowls that they prefer to have their cereal in, and the bowls were dirty, and I didn't want to wash them. So we had a different bowl that I was trying to give my son cereal in, and he was adamant that there was spit on this bowl. I was like, dude, we wash our dishes. Your other bowl isn't washed. That one might have spit on it because you ate cereal out of it yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, we washed this bowl. I know there isn't spit on this bowl. And he was adamant. He could not eat cereal out of this bowl. He needed a different bowl because there was spit. After the fact, I've been working on being a better parent for years and making sure I am approaching situations with my children that cause frustration, but approaching them emotionally levelly and making sure that I am meeting them where they are. And so I was very calm during this whole thing. We eventually put it into a different bowl because that was the only thing he would accept. But after the fact, I was thinking about this situation, and I realized, meeting my son where he was with his logic of there's spit on the bowl that he firmly believes that was his truth. What can I do to meet him there?
Sure.
His truth is there's spit on the bowl. Fine. Instead of just saying there's not spit, eat your cereal, saying, okay, what can we do to resolve this? Meeting him where his logic is. I think that can be very powerful, where we acknowledge the perspective of other people and meet them where their truth is. Recognize that we might disagree, but how can I work with you on this moment to get to where we both want to be? is important, especially when you're working with kids.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And part of what you're describing is picking your battles, right? When it comes down to what part of this disagreement really matters and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. Between Lucy and Edmund, it did matter that Lucy really had gone to another world, right? As far as Narnia is concerned, because they needed 2 queens and 2 kings to help overthrow the White Witch. On the other hand, though, if right afterwards there were other things going on in the home, Lucy could say, you know what? If you don't think you went into that thing, okay, I can work with that just to move forward, right? In terms of picking your battles and not getting distracted by agreement for the sake of agreement. I need you to say that I'm right. Sometimes we get stuck in this moment where and that very much can happen with me, is where if I start to get into a debate, like I need this person to acknowledge that the way I'm seeing it is the right way, I've completely lost the point. And you're right, to meet people where they're at, because our perception and our experience very much is subjective. And 2 people can experience the same stimuli in very different ways, and both of their experiences be true, because it is how they genuinely experienced them. That said, I do think there are things that do matter. If, my son is convinced that his seatbelt is bad for him, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, son, you're wrong. There are some elements there that's what I mean where it comes to picking battles in terms of where does it really matter. And that's what Dalinar is going to have to face. Like if he is meant to unite the other high princes, if this really is a task from God, he's going to have to work with the high princes, like you with your son, and find a way to do it and meet them where they're at. Mm-hmm. But when one says, listen, I'm not going to do it, Dalinar is going to have to say, well, I'm going to find a way. If it is something that must be done.
We see Dalinar already doing it, actually, in this chapter, where Elhokar says, there was an assassin in my room. Dalinar, rather than saying, dude, no, there wasn't, get over it, he meets him where Elhokar was and says, okay, I have investigated it. I have talked with the servants. I have dug into this situation as far as I could, and I haven't found evidence of that. But he doesn't outright say, no, Elhokar, you're crazy.
Right.
He dives in. He washes the bowl, as it were, because Elhokar thought there was spit.
Because maybe he did see a dark figure. Who knows what that figure was, right? Maybe he did see something in the shadows. And so I think that's recognizing that there are other ways of seeing things. There are other perspectives. I mentioned the psychology of religion class, and it has lots and lots of discussion. I warned students at the outset that you're going to be doing spiritual dialogues with other students where you're going to need to divulge your beliefs and share them in a way that's not aggressive. And we're going to hear other people's perspectives without being defensive about them trying to convert us. And rule number 1 in this class, because you're going to have these dialogues, rule number 1 is that highly moral and intelligent people can believe differently from me. I think that's part of what you're getting at, is that when we're having a disagreement, instead of just seeing them as dumb or bad, or malicious, to say they clearly are perceiving this in a different way from me, and it could be they're genuine.
That's exactly what Dalinar and Adolin do as well. Adolin saying, why is he charging in front of the army when we know that he is concerned about assassins? Why is he doing these brash, ridiculous things when he is paranoid at night, wondering if there's knives in the dark? And Dalinar goes through and talks about like the psychology of what's going on with Elhokar. I love he says, the hallmark of insecurity is bravado.
Yes.
And Adolin, he says, strange how much the king's actions made sense when explained that way. Adolin looked up at his father. How can the others whisper that he's a coward? Can't they see his wisdom? When we get more context as to what's going on in a person's life, things make sense. Even with people that we wildly disagree with, if we approach it from why would a reasonable, rational person think and behave in this way? We can come together in that way rather than just labeling people as dumb and bad.
It reminds me of when I was getting my training to be a counseling psychologist. And it was one of my first counseling placements to work under training. And Dr. Michael Day was my clinical supervisor at Indiana University Southeast. He taught me about empathy in this regard. And it's something, here I am, 12, 13 years removed from this conversation. But I had this client who was self-sabotaging so many times. They keep making the same choices that make their life harder. And I was saying, Dr. Day, I don't understand it. I'm trying to have empathy. And he said, ask yourself this. Why is it a good move? Why is what they're doing a good idea? I'm like, it's not. He's like, no, it is. Why is it? What would it take for them to think this is like their best move? And that changed the way I thought about it. And I kept trying to think about them clinically from this third person perspective instead of putting myself in their shoes and say, how would my life have to be in order for me to think this is my best move? And when we try and understand, instead of saying, this is why they're wrong, say, I wonder how they come to this conclusion. Like you said, as a reasonable, moral person, how would they come to this place? Really, again, you brought up Ender's Game, and this is what Ender's Game is all about, right? It's about understanding, being willing to understand your enemy as if it was you. The best villains of any story think they are the heroes of their own story. And if you can see them, say, how is what they're doing, how does it make sense? And when you start to see that, that's when you start to build empathy.
Yeah.
And people are often afraid of empathy, particularly in situations of argument, because the second you start to empathize with the person you're arguing with, you're starting to acknowledge their points. You know, when you think about political discourse and all kinds of conflict and different types of debates that really are tearing people apart, it's because we're afraid to acknowledge that they might have a point. Or we don't even have to acknowledge that they're right, but to acknowledge that given your situation, I can see where you got there. That's a powerful, powerful principle to be able to see, oh, now, even if it's misguided, I see why you did, how you got here.
Random silly quote that is super impactful for me from the Pirates of the Caribbean. So at the end of Pirates of the Caribbean, in the first movie, they make it to the island with all of the treasure and the cursed coins and everything. And it turns out that Jack Sparrow has been left there. Like the other crew members, they take the ship and abandon him at that island. And so they have to like get on a rowboat and row away, right? And when questioned as to why he's not angry at them for taking the ship, Jack says, they done what's right by them, can't ask for more than that. And that perspective of, no, people are always going to act in the way that they believe is right. People are going to make the best choice that they think they can make. And that is all we really can demand from people, is to act how they think would be best in whatever situation. We might disagree as to what that best is, what that right is. But if we acknowledge that people are going to behave in a way that they individually believe is rational and reasonable and moral, we may disagree on the rationality of it, but we know that people are going to have their reasons, and those reasons are to them always going to be valid.
They may not have all the information, but it helps us to build a genuine relationship with people when we can see ourselves in that place. That's what Dalinar is able to see in Elhokar, and Adolin a little bit with Dalinar's help. It'll be interesting to see where they go from here. But as they're standing around, they think they're safe. Suddenly, a 30-foot tall, 14-legged beast does a sneak attack.
Rolled really high on that move silently.
Yes. I don't know how he does it, but somehow this massive beast catches them by surprise.
It's very Jurassic Park, especially with how Sanderson has framed this, of the Chol very determinedly walking away from the side of the chasm. Yes. And then we see the end of the rope that comes up that doesn't have a pig on it. It's like dropping the goat into the T-Rex containment and then pulling it up, and there's no goat anymore. Like, here comes the T-Rex.
Yes, that's perfect. Yes. And wow, we just see an epic battle, right? Adolin and Dalinar are the all-stars. Even Sadeas with his not shard bow, and soldiers who Dalinar's like, hey, to their credit, they're lining up. Probably going to die, but they are following their training. We get the science of taking down a chasm fiend by slowly hacking away its legs till it can't hold itself up. But we see some interesting behaviors here that I think it's interesting to notice characters in this moment, right? Elokar is putting on quite the show.
Yep.
He just walks straight at the beast and he's talking smack. Are you a god? But what Dalinar said earlier, right? The hallmark of insecurity is bravado. And that is very, very true. I remember I can still hear one of my clinical instructors in psychology saying the heart of narcissism is shame. And so he is putting on a show. He wants people desperately to see how brave he is and what a conqueror he can be. He doesn't like living in his father's shadow. And so he goes on these hunts. He knows people think he's paranoid. So he wants to show how brave he is. And he's putting on a show. And at some point, we see Renarin kind of stumble out onto the battlefield saying, Father, what can I do to help? And he says, get out of here. This is not a place for you. You can't do this. He's worried about him.
Because at this point, we've heard that Renarin has a blood weakness.
Some blood condition, yeah.
Where he has a side sword, but he's never learned how to use it. Adolin is very protective of Renarin.
And Dalinar, too. There's a great moment when Wit shows up, and he gives Renarin a hard time, and Dalinar's like, back off. And Wit says, he's stronger than you think. You're underestimating him.
I mock the people that can benefit from it, is what he says.
Yes. And he's stronger than you think.
Yeah.
Right, is that last line. And we see that. I think there's a hallmark to Renarin's strength when he's like, I don't know how to fight, but Father, I'm here to help. Tell me what to do. And that's pretty amazing. I think it's so great that he steps. I contrast him with Elokar, right? Where Elokar's putting on this show. Renarin's not putting on a show. He just wants to make sure his dad doesn't die and he wants to protect others. This scene makes me think of Your Mind on Fear. You've probably read stories of people who have like lifted cars to help save family members. I've been reading about that and looking because in this moment, I guess we forgot to describe, near the end, Elokar is collapsed underneath at the feet of this beast. And it is about to slam one of its 4 massive claws and kill the king. And somehow in a matter of seconds, Dalinar drops his shard blade, runs over there, slides in on his knees and catches that claw. With plate-enhanced strength, but it is still incredible. Like Adolin is dumbstruck. He's just like, he stops. He has to come back to himself and realize, I should do something. People are blown away with the strength that Dalinar shows here in this moment. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of these people who have lifted cars off. And, fear has this interesting power. Sometimes people talk about adrenaline and fear making us superhuman, but it really doesn't. What happens is whatever our automatic responses are, kick in. So, when people have trained, such as Dalinar, he has trained his body and mind to respond in those protective manners. When we overlearn a skill, our body will default to whatever that overlearned skill is. Mm-hmm. And then in these moments of extreme fear, our brain releases chemicals that are pain relieving, anesthetic, essentially. They're actually the same chemicals that are the active ingredients in heroin and marijuana. They protect us from feeling these negative pains. And so people who have been through these horrific experiences will say, I felt nothing. Like there was a guy who was in an avalanche, tumbling in his car, and he was able to dig through the snow, pull his wife out, and then hike together several miles to get to a hospital. They did a run over, they looked okay. Later on, they went home and suddenly were in tons of pain and came back and discovered he had a broken rib. They didn't find it at first because he was like, I'm not in pain. But it was because his body had put him in the sympathetic nervous system was just firing on all cylinders and released these chemicals that allows us to do things that normally we wouldn't be able to do because we don't feel the pain associated with it. So like with people lifting cars, what the research shows is that we have this idea that's called absolute strength. And that is the maximum our muscles can actually lift. And we almost never lift that because it would be super painful to do it. And so like a professional lifter, it's believed that they can lift about 65% of their absolute strength in a practice setting. Huh. When they go to a competitive competition, they get closer to 75 or 80% of it. And that's why records are always broken at competitions, because the adrenaline of the situation allows them to lift more closer to their capacity. So fear doesn't make us a superhuman. What it does is it removes some of the limitations to actually allow us to do what our absolute physical limits are. And that's what we're seeing with Dalinar in this moment. He's catching a claw And the fear of losing his nephew, he's already lost his brother, he will not lose his nephew. And that fear, it focuses our attention on what we value, on what's most important to us. He is not going to let that happen. He's probably lifting at close to 100% of his absolute strength. And it's amazing. It's incredible.
It's interesting. There can be such varied responses to fear. I think that is mostly due to just where the fear is focused. When we are afraid externally, that can drive humanity to some really incredible things, like lifting cars off of people, because you are afraid for someone or something else.
Yes.
But when we are afraid internally, that can drive us to non-action. And so that response to the same emotion, just depending on where it's focused, can be complete opposite ends of the spectrum.
I'm glad you bring that up, because one of the things I was worried about in bringing up these cool stories of superhuman feats when we have fear is to not pathologize non-action, the way you put it. Sometimes when people are in those situations, they don't lift the car up. They aren't able to do certain things, and then they feel like a failure. Like, why didn't I do anything? Because actually, the most common response is freezing, is withdrawing, is not action. It's what have we trained for, right? The difference between Renar and Dalinar is training. Almost everybody, most people don't have advanced lifting training and other these types of tactical training that Dalinar had. And so the automatic response then is to protect ourselves and to step back. And we might step in between, right, if we're trying to protect a child, but we still don't know what to do. We don't have any training for it. Fear tells us that something is threatened. So you talked about internal fears.
Yeah.
Right? It's one thing to be like protecting our family, protecting our nephew or a child. But when it's us, when I feel threatened, social fears, right? Or fear of failure. Fear of failure is one of the most common ones. And so that leads to a self-protective withdrawal. And that's not cowardice. It's a strategic response to what is being threatened, which is my self-respect. I would hate for people to hear this and think that, okay, so heroism is lifting a car off somebody. No, that's a power lifter who has removed some of their limitations, but they're acting under what they've trained themselves to do. If we want to think about that and think about if fear leaves me to what is automatic, what do I want to train my body to respond with when I feel afraid? In therapy, if someone is trying to overcome a phobia, one of the first things we do is we start to develop a new conditioned response when I'm faced with something that's scary with slow breathing. So we're going to show pictures and images or videos of things that are associated with that phobia and make your automatic response be to slow your breathing rather than rapidly breathe. And so what we're doing is we're training you, overtraining you to respond with a relaxation response instead of a fearful response. And so there are things that we can do to try and help ourselves to respond to fear in a different way.
I think part of that is just kind of exposing ourselves to fear. There are a lot of things online and they're like, hey, do something that scares you today.
100%.
And that as we get more comfortable with fear, we're able to think more rationally during those fearful moments and respond in the way that we want to. It takes practice to do that.
Absolutely. It's what we call habituation. We want to habituate. We want to feel more familiar with what happens when I get anxious, when I feel afraid. And that in and of itself is an act of courage. And I think that's one of the important takeaways from this, that I love that we have these four. Adolin is also awesome in this scene. He is a hero right alongside Dalinar, that Kholin family. But you contrast it with Elhokar, who is also standing up to the beast, but doing so in such a way that is very different.
Yeah.
Do you think he says all those things if there's not an audience? We don't really see that. He is responding to his insecurity, right? Which is he's afraid of the beast, but he's more afraid of other people thinking he's a coward. Fear and our response to fear shows us, it kind of points us to what we value. And then our training is what determines what we can do about it.
I do think, even if there wasn't an audience at that point, I could see Elhokar responding and calling out these same things, because sometimes when we are in a stressful type of situation, the audience is ourselves.
That's a good point.
Elhokar could be saying these things not because other people are watching, but because he has to convince himself that he isn't afraid. By being brash and showing that bravado in this situation where we know he's been paranoid But here in this moment, he can be bigger than what he normally would be. So the audience could just be him, and he's convincing himself rather than convincing others.
That's a really good point. And I think, even though you're not calling me out, I think I am. I'm going to call myself out that I'm being a little too hard on Elokar. I've got Adolin, an Adolin attitude towards Elokar right now, and I think you're absolutely right, because he is definitely trying to convince himself he's not a coward. He is afraid. He's afraid that others will think he is a coward, because if they think he's a coward, then it means he's a coward, right? He has a hard time understanding who he is apart from what other people think he is.
Yeah.
If I can convince other people that I'm not a coward, it means I'm not. You're right. He is his own audience in this case. It's a maladaptive response. It's not helpful for him, but doing just exactly what Dalinar did for Adolin earlier. I'm reframing a little bit the way I'm thinking about him, and I think you're absolutely right. So in terms of what can we take from this, because we're not fighting 30-foot tall, 14-legged chasm fiends, I do want to normalize that freezing is not evidence of a lack of heroism. Freezing simply means we haven't trained ourselves to respond in any particular way. That's where, again, it comes to those soldiers who lined up and Dalinar's impressed with it. It's because that's the training they've received. And so they're gonna default to what they've been trained. And so freezing isn't evidence that we're cowards or lack of heroes. It's just science. It's biology, physiology, and psychology. As we think about what can we do about that, then is we can think about, okay, I'm not facing my 30-foot tall beast in my life. We all have them, whatever they are. And when we're not, I could ask myself, how do I want myself to respond? Because some people like to think they will rise to the occasion. We don't. It's human psychology and physiology. We go to whatever our default training is that's automatic, whatever's overlearned. We're not going to rise to the occasion. What do I want my default response to be? And I'm going to start practicing that with some of those baby steps that we talked about in the other episode, to start learning coping skills that I want to be my default that aren't now. I'm going to start practicing those. And then also, we can show all sorts of versions of heroism after the fact. What can we do after it's happened? Are we helping others? Are we consoling? Are we supporting? After trauma, after the hurricane has passed and FEMA shows up, what are we doing to be a part of the solution? And how can we help others? Thinking about Ishik, are there ways that I can whistle in the face of what's just happened to help and support other people?
Heroism is not just what we do in the moment of conflict, but what we do after. When the Chasm Fiend attacks, yes, people are responding to that and being heroic. Dalinar catches the freaking claw to protect Elokar. That is absolutely a heroic act. But after these bad things happen, after Chasm Fiends attack in our lives, because there are Chasm Fiends that are attacking, what do we do? To quote Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. Where are the helpers? And if you aren't seeing any, be a helper. How can we be helpers after Chasm Fiend attacks? And if you don't know how to do that, practice now, because it's getting that practice of what you want to do in moments of crisis. That's how you do it, is by practicing beforehand.
And find something to do and then do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are paralyzed. We're like, well, I don't even know how to help. And I'll say, hey, if you need anything, let me know, right? That people love to say that, right? If you need anything, just let me know. And then they never do. And I feel good about offering. But instead, like when we have a big activity at church and I'm like, hey, and my son's messing around, I'm like, hey, help us clean up. He's like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm like, see that thing on the floor? Do you think you could pick that up? Chances are that wasn't put there on purpose, right? Like just look for something, pick it up. There were spears scattered around on that plane, I'm sure. Start picking up spears, whatever it is, just look for something and do it. And you're helping. I'm speaking very concretely here, but like when it comes to supporting a friend who's going through a hard time, when you see somebody who has something terrible happen in their life, just showing up and sitting can be the helper. And that's what we can do. Take action, and that's your act of heroism. You don't have to be there in the moment. It's okay if you freeze. That's science. After it's over, now you can be a hero. When it comes to just trying to help, one thing that you can do is with what Nerd HQ is trying to do to help provide free counseling to people who are struggling. Sometimes people struggle to make that call themselves, even going to Nerd HQ themselves. And if we see a need, I'm excited about the coin that I have for myself, but as I look around, I can order a coin for a friend. And deliver it to them. That can be me showing up and asking them, right? Ask the first question in suicide prevention is, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Someone has to ask that question. And that's what the next step is all about. Brandon is offering this letter and this coin that says, I want you to make a commitment. But that can be hard for somebody to find, to go to that website themselves. And something that we can do as friends is to order that for them and to come and sit down and say, hey, I am thinking about you and you matter. And if you're hearing this, by now you're on episode 10. You should be familiar with this, with Nerd HQ and what they're doing. But if necessary, consider this your invitation. To go, you can find links at our website at thenextideal.com and connect with Nerd HQ and find that resource and talk to somebody free of charge. They've partnered with Brandon Sanderson and Dragonsteel to provide the counseling resources at no charge to make sure that everybody has those opportunities, those resources to help them feel needed and be seen.
There's a lot of chasm fiends attacking people nowadays.
And they are sneaky.
Yeah,
I know. I made a joke about it. When we're talking about metaphorical chasm fiends, I mean, they're ninjas.
And so one of the ways that you can be a helper is by just developing that awareness, trying to spot those chasm fiends as they're circling the plateaus that we're on, as they're circling the plateaus where our communities are. Be a helper by looking out for the people around you. That's what Dalinar is doing. Dalinar saves Elokar, stopping that chasm fiend claw coming and crushing him in the same way that you can stop the chasm fiend claw of depression crushing someone that you care about. So be a helper, reach out to the people around you that need help, recognize the people that need help, and provide those resources through the Next Step coin, through Nerd HQ, through just being there with someone so that we can have all of our people here. We need everybody here.
So for my next ideal, we talk about the chasm fiends in people's lives. There are also chulls in people's lives that are fleeing. What I mean is I'm going to try and look and be aware of those signs where people haven't asked for help yet. The chul fleeing the scene was evidence before the chasm fiend came up that something wasn't right. And so I'm going to do my best to watch for the chulls in my own life, but also in those around me.
I'm going to do some deliberate practice of being afraid. I mentioned the silly internet things of do something that scares you today. I recognize that in my life, I have been controlled by fear very frequently, whether that has stopped me from doing something because I've been afraid of failure or caused me to do something because I've been afraid of disconnection or something like that. I want to deliberately practice being afraid and doing things, sort of connecting it to last episode, doing things spitefully fearful, doing things that I recognize are uncomfortable and put me out of my comfort zone because they do that.
Nice. I think I've mentioned this before, but my kids have learned to stop telling me when something scares them. You realize you have a psychologist for a dad. Now you have to do it. That's perfect. I love it. This is great.
Sometimes the scariest things are self-improvement, but do the scary thing. Work toward the next ideal.
Nailed it.
Big shout out to Revelry Play for being one of the top members of our Patreon. If you'd like to join them, head over to patreon.com/thenextideal. Thank you, Revelry Play.